Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. I'm so glad you're here. My instinct in this moment is always to say, welcome, even though I just said that a minute ago. I just want you to know you are welcome here, sharing stories of this world where kindness is commonplace and where there is time and space to enjoy small pleasures of daily life. Knowing that other people feel at home there. It's a lovely feeling, like we're building a community, even without meeting. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm going to say it again, welcome. I tell conflict-free stories that are family-friendly and can, if you let them, become a sort of meditation to listen to. They emphasize a lot of sensory experience, which naturally makes you present. They can help you step down from anxiety and refocus your mind with a more optimistic filter. They come from my bedtime story podcast, Nothing Much Happens. So if you need help getting to or returning to sleep, go check that out. And you can subscribe to an ad-free experience through the link in our bio. Now, let's take a big breath in through the nose and sigh from your mouth. Again, breathe in and let it go. Good. Our stories today are about the joy of imagination and the creative ways people can add magic into life. We'll start with a cup of coffee and some time at the window in Daydreamer. Then we'll stroll through downtown as warm weather brings villagers out to play in A Dance in the Park. Finally, we'll step into the school gymnasium to pick out some new reads for the summer in Book Fair. Daydreamer. I'd been sleeping with the windows open for a week or so. A few nights had been cool, but I just added a thick quilt to the bed and happily dozed with the night air circling over me. On those mornings, I'd been a bit quicker than usual to get my cup of coffee and climb back into the still warm bed, sipping from my cup as the light turned pink outside, and feeling myself warming and waking and wondering what the day would be. It is one of the best moments of the day, the first moment, as every possibility lies open to you, and nothing has yet been decided. Daydreaming, I've realized as I've gotten older, is underrated. So I spent that first moment of the day just letting my mind float on possibilities, like an upturned leaf floating on the current of a stream. I leaned back against the pillows and smelled the good toasted scent of my coffee. It was a dark roast and reminded me of the smell of cacao beans. I thought of a meal I'd eaten a few years before that had ended with a cup of sweet chai and a square of bitter dark chocolate. The sweet and the bitter had gone so well together. I'd nibbled tiny bites and then taken small sips to make it last as long as I could. It was, I thought, just like the cool air and the warm quilt. Opposites, but friends. The difference between them pulling out the best parts of each other. I heard the rumble of an engine and looked down through the window beside my bed to spy a school bus climbing up the street. It stopped at the house next door, and I heard the pneumatic hiss of the side door opening, and my neighbor hurrying his little one out to climb the steps. She had a poster board rolled up into a tube and fastened with paper clips at either end under her arm, and a lunchbox dangling from the other hand. I smiled watching her make her way up the stairs, remembering that she had told me proudly a few days before that she had been working on her science fair project. I thought back to my own science fair days and remembered walking up and down the aisles of tables set up in the gym, excited to see how a lemon could be a battery, how a dozen tiny plants might have grown differently because they'd been fed their sunlight in east-facing windows or west. And of course, the showstopper, an ambitious parent-child team-built papier-mâché volcano, hand-painted from tiny pots of poster paint and erupting with baking soda and vinegar. I wondered what her little mind was curious about. What bit of the natural world had she explored? And I vowed to ask her when she got off the bus this afternoon. I went back to daydreaming as I watched the bus stop at the corner and pick up another small scientist carrying a giant cardboard display carefully over their head. I thought about that bus full of children and what they dreamt of doing when they got older. They'd be all different sorts of people. Some would travel to faraway places, and others might live their whole lives in our little neighborhood. Some would make art or become athletes, discover, invent, teach, be parents themselves, or maybe, and I smiled thinking of it, drive a school bus, and someday be there to help a student up the steps with a science fair project in their arms. It made me think of a night many years before, when I'd been in a city I didn't know well, and I'd thought I'd just missed the last bus home. A man my grandfather's age had seen me running to catch it, and when I finally stopped at a corner to think what to do next, he came to ask if I was all right. He leaned on his cane as he listened to my story. Last bus, my friends had caught the one going the other way, too far to walk, not sure how to get home. There would be another bus, he promised. You'll get home just fine, he said. He waited with me, asking about school and my summer plans, distracting me from my worries, and sure enough, a quarter of an hour later, a number 4 bus pulled up to the stop. I thanked him for helping me, and he watched me go up the steps and settle in a seat. The window was pulled down a few inches, and as the door closed and the driver prepared to pull away, he called out to watch for my stop and to be careful. I still thought about him all these years later, that he'd cared for a stranger enough to sit with me and wait, that he'd taken a bit of his own time to make sure I got home safely. I certainly hoped he had too. I still hadn't moved from my warm quilt, but my mind had been back in time, thousands of miles away, and cast a bit into the future as well. Where would that drifting leaf float off to next? I saw the mail carrier walking up to a mailbox a few houses away, and even from my nest up high in my bedroom, I spotted a square, bright red envelope as it was pulled from the mail pouch and tucked into the box. What, I wondered, was in that envelope? A birthday card? An invitation to a fancy party? A love letter confessing someone's deepest desires and hopes? The leaf went tumbling down a waterfall, rushing past 100 possibilities. That's the promise of a letter, sealed tightly in an envelope, isn't it? The same as the promise of the first moment of a new day. It could take you anywhere. I decided the letter in that red envelope was from a long-lost cousin, informing the recipient of a family fortune now up for grabs if only they would come for a weekend at great-uncle's house in the country. I imagined a long dining room table with an inch of dust on the dishes and a secret passageway that went from the false panel in the library to a door hidden by a tapestry in the hall upstairs. I conjured up a groundskeeper with a secret, and an initial carved in the base of a stone statue in the center of a hedge maze. I took the last sip of my coffee, laughing at myself and the story I'd started in my mind. Not laughing in jest or derision, but in delight. This is the secret we forget as we get older, that we can go anywhere in our minds, and that daydreaming can be its own adventure and escape. When we can't travel, when we can't go back or forward in time, we can dream. And a dream doesn't have to be real to feel true. A dance in the park. We were on the cusp of real summer weather. And when I sat on the front porch this morning and let the sunshine creep through the boards and onto my toes, I noticed that it no longer felt filtered and weak like it often does in the winter and early spring. This was summer sunshine. It warmed you through and brought out freckles and felt, when you lifted your face to it with your eyes tightly shut, like food and medicine and the missing element that was suddenly abundant in your system. I sat until the whole porch was lit up with morning light and listened to the birds calling and the street waking up. Neighbors waved from their driveways, coffee cups in hand, stepping out to fetch the paper or to peer thoughtfully down at sprouting gardens. Kids on bikes and skateboards already deep into the games and stories of the day rolled past me. I supposed it was my turn to head out into the day. I stood up and checked my pockets. I had house keys and sunglasses and a few dollars. Everything I needed. One of the lovely things about warm weather days is the ease with which you can leave the house. After months of layering on coats and scarves, thick socks and heavy boots, checking the weather report and shoveling the front walk, it is a joy to step out in sandals and shirt sleeves and be comfortable in the open air without any planning at all. I hopped down the steps and into the grass. The sun warmed the back of my neck as I started down the sidewalk. I felt it on my forearms and calves and the bridge of my nose. I read once that in some ancient mythology, in some part of the world, I'd forgotten where, they believed that the heat of the sun was stored in trees, and when you burned their wood, the fire was just the sun being finally released back into the world. I thought of this as the hot sun forced a shiver down my spine. I must have stored the cold from all the snow I had shoveled over the years, all the snowmen I'd rolled into place, all the flakes I'd caught on my tongue. Now that chill was wrung from my body, and I felt a momentary wave of goosebumps on my arms as it passed back into the atmosphere. I hadn't paid much attention to where I was walking, as it didn't much matter to me, but turning a corner, I was happy to see I was on the edge of downtown. I hadn't been to the shops and cafes on these streets for a while, and I'd missed them. There was a window full of pastries and fruit tarts at the bakery. Beside the tarts was a stack of fresh loaves, still dusted with flour. They'd been scored just before they went into the oven so that their crusts showed a design of curling leaves or crisscrosses. A few doors down, in the window of a gift shop, were a neat row of handmade soaps and jars of salves and lotions, displays of bracelets and earrings and hand-drawn cards and pictures. I didn't need a thing, but I liked looking. The walk and the sun had made me thirsty, and I remembered a little cafe in the next street that made iced hibiscus tea, and I strolled off toward it. The outdoor tables were full of folks having a drink or a bite to eat, some keeping company with friends, and others happily sitting with a book in hand or a newspaper spread open on their lap. I stepped inside and ordered my tea. I decided to take it to go so I could keep walking. Behind the bar, they had a tall glass urn with the bright pink tea inside. Along with the hibiscus flowers, it was brewed with fresh strawberries and raspberries and knobbly branches of ginger. A minute later, I was standing back out in the fresh air, taking a long drink of the tea, which was cold and tart-tasting, the flavor a bit like cranberries. I sipped it as I made my way up one street and down another. The flower baskets hanging from the street lamps were full of petunias and geraniums and fuchsias. I stopped to look at the posters in the window of the record shop and made a few mental plans for gigs and concerts I could see in the next few weeks. On the lawn of the library, at the edge of the park, kids were grouped around picnic tables with a few grown-up volunteers overseeing some craft project. They darted back and forth between the tables, gathering up supplies onto paper plates to make into collages. I could hear their voices and laughter through the still air as I went further into the park. Everything was green now. Thick, fresh-trimmed grass, shrubs and hedges, and layers of shiny leaves overhead. As I came around the side of the lake, I heard music playing. I followed it down a path and into an open stone plaza, where the farmers' market was set up on Sunday mornings. Suddenly, the music was louder, and a crowd of people danced to it. I remembered seeing a poster by the library for a group class. Salsa in the park, it had said. I smiled to myself as I watched the faces of the dancers. They were moving together, sometimes in couples and sometimes in groups. Some laughing and some quite serious, seeming to dance as much with an engagingly lifted eyebrow as with their feet as they stepped and turned and shifted. A ring of happy spectators stood watching, tapping their toes and clapping their hands to the music. I settled onto a bench to watch, now and then catching the eye of a dancer or passerby. We said to each other with our eyes, "This is nice. I'm glad to be here for it." I'd spent a lot of time on my own lately, and that served its own purpose. Solitude was fortifying for me. It gave me space and quiet and a steady center. But I'd been like a gear turning all by itself in the house. That gear rotated and kept my machinery going. But today, feeling the sun and waving at my neighbors, looking in the store windows and drinking tea in the open air, clapping along with the music while people danced, it felt like my gear was syncing back up with everyone else's. We powered each other, and that felt like rediscovering my place among my fellows. I closed my eyes and listened to the clapping hands. I lifted my face and let the sun shine on it. I took a deep breath in and let it out. the book fair. There were only a few weeks of school left before summer vacation began, and you could feel the anticipation when you walked the halls. There was a push-pull energy in every classroom, a push to the end to make the most of the last days of learning, and a pull to the warming weather and adventure of summertime. Sometimes that pull was literal. Our students and ourselves pulled to the windows to look at the trees in full leaf and the bright blue skies. We teachers were doing our best to walk the line, to keep the students' interest and still let them be kids who had big feelings about summer break. We'd found over the years that having a few special events to look forward to in the last month or so of classes helped everyone come to school with some enthusiasm. So the schedule would be full, right up till the final day. We'd planned a school-wide field day. After weeks of being asked, hour after hour, if we could please have classes outside, we finally would be able to say yes. It would be a whole day of outdoor activities. There would be chalk drawing contests on the back parking lot, a treasure hunt with clues planted all over the playground, races and games on the athletic fields, and snack tables set up just about everywhere. Our cafeteria staff would make gallons of lemonade and pyramids of Rice Krispie treats. There would be giant fruit bowls full of apples and pears and bananas that no one would eat. And at lunchtime, a small caravan of cars would pull up, delivering enough pizzas to feed us all. A feat that seemed impossible, but somehow happened every year. There was also the spring concert to look forward to. Our 5th through 8th graders would file into their seats on stage in the auditorium and nervously grip their trumpets and clarinets. Our music teacher would stand on her riser, with the music spread out on a stand in front of her, a baton in her hand, and wait till every musician's eyes were on her. She'd raise her baton, and they'd all take a breath together. Their instruments raised and ready, and off they'd go. That was one of my favorite nights of the year. Our students playing together with such focus and care. Whenever I walked through the music hallway, I'd hear them working through a new piece or else playing something they'd worked on for weeks with pride, and I'd smile. All of them coming so far. That was a night when all our local restaurants would be busy. Families taking their saxophonists and xylophone players out for a meal, still in their matching dress pants and button-down shirts. Of course, our 8th graders would be graduating and moving on, and that was always an emotional day for all of us. When you see a student, especially one who might have struggled on their way up from elementary school, now standing in front of their families and fellows, ready to head into their next journey, it makes your heart brim. So glad for them and grateful to have been a part of it. And then when they come back to visit years later, when they stop into your classroom or office, and you can spot the little face inside of the grown-up one they now wear, and they tell you what they're doing, how their life is going, well, it's a feeling of pride. A child you helped in your way to raise, who comes home and remembers you. I was thinking of all these moments, getting a little misty, if I'm honest, as I was setting up for what was, in my opinion, the end of the school year blockbuster event. And that was the book fair. We were a book-obsessed school. It had started years ago with our last school librarian, whose love for reading was so great that it became contagious. She ran reading contests for every grade, and started a couple of different book clubs for the staff. She made curated tables in the library for different genres, for every holiday, for the birthdays of favorite authors. She wore costumes pretty regularly and had boxes of props the kids could play with as they listened to stories. And she turned our small, poorly attended book fairs into events that the whole school looked forward to. When she retired, it took several of us to fill her shoes, but we'd managed to keep this love for books a mainstay in our school. And the fair was still a big part of that. It no longer fit in the school library, so we were setting up in the gymnasium today. And we didn't just set up a bunch of folding tables and lay out books on them. We made the gym into a portal to distant lands and other times. Part of what made our students fall in love with reading was bringing the stories out of the books. So we'd each picked a few favorite titles, and with the help of the 7th and 8th grade art classes, we're transforming each section of the gym into a slice of those worlds. One of my picks told a story of a world under the ocean, where Atlantis still thrived, and the art students had covered the windows with blue and green gels so that the light coming in rippled like water. There were streamers that moved on a crank, washing over you, a bit like those strips of cloth in a car wash. And we had a speaker playing wave sounds. Across the gym in our classics section, rubber hobbit feet had been procured and sat in a row under a dozen hanging cloaks. I'd heard there was a ring hidden somewhere in the display, and that one of the many science fair volcanoes had been saved to erupt at an exciting moment. We had book worlds for all ages of our students, ghost stories and first loves, mysteries and adventures, sports and science, and every way to be in the world. In our school, we welcomed every story, and our students flourished as their worlds grew wider with each turned page. We would send them into the summer with an armload of new ideas, and I was already looking forward to welcoming them back in the fall, to watch them continue to grow. We hope you enjoyed your visit to the village of Nothing Much, and that you'll come back soon for more dreams, more dances, and more stories. Till then, let's be good to one another.